I have a bunch of Starbound OCs. Some of them you might be familiar with, like Naji, one of my Florin characters. Others, like Dawadra, another Florin OC I had, not so much, unless you've been around my channel for a while. I wanted to make a vlog discussing them because why not? Some of my other content ideas that aren't Starbound Mod Showcase videos are taking longer to put together than I expected, and this is one I felt like I could get out quickly, so here I go. To start off, I remember the very first Starbound character I made. They were a Florin, of course. This was during Starbound's beta days in 2014, and best I remember, they looked like the Florin characters seen in some enraged koala footage I slipped into another vlog I uploaded recently. By the way, yes, Enraged Koala is the name of one of Starbound's beta builds. Don't ask me why it was called that. While I'm on this tangent, I'm wondering how many people realize that was Enraged Koala in that vlog. All that aside, I don't have much else to say about that Florin and all the other characters I made during Starbound's beta days. There wasn't much to them. They didn't have much of a backstory, if any, nor did I use them for roleplaying. I also didn't make any art of them. Again, this was 2014. I wasn't as good an artist then compared to now, and any art I made in those days was related to My Little Pony. Yeah, I was a brony, but that's a topic for another vlog. As much as I loved what Starbound was during its beta days, to the point where I'll go to my grave reiterating those opinions over and over and over, it was just a game me and my friends played for a while before shelving for a year, waiting for the next major beta build to come along. Rinse and repeat all the way through the 1.0 release, after which we simply stopped playing it entirely and moved on. Even during the 1.0 release, however, I didn't talk about it much, and the OCs I made during that period, again, had no backstory or anything like that. By 2021, however, I found myself seriously enjoying Starbound again. I'd long since dived deep into the sea of mods available for the game, and I'd started gearing my YouTube channel more towards Starbound content. My mod showcase series became a regular thing, and I wanted to make a mod showcase about Feast of Fire and Smoke, or FFS. That wound up becoming a series called Frackin' FFS, and the main OC I made for that series was a Lost Tree named Francesca, the Lost Tree being a modded race. I made a video about the Lost Tree mod not long before I started Frackin' FFS, and I thought it would be a neat idea to explore the lore behind them. I wrote a backstory for Francesca, the first time I ever did that for one of my Starbound OCs, based around that lore. I gave her a personality, and I made other OCs who became her friends and her superiors. Going forward, I had these grand plans for Francesca and these other characters. I knew I was going to tackle Shellguard at some point, and my initial idea for Frackin' Shellguard was that it would be a sequel to Frackin' FFS, focused around Francesca and this mystery surrounding her, who she was, who the Lost Tree were, and so on. All this because I wanted my playthrough of FFS to be unique. In other words, I didn't want it to be just another playthrough of FFS, and I didn't want to feel like I was copying other people's playthroughs. In the end though, Frackin' FFS turned out kinda bad. At least that's my opinion. Looking back on it not long after I finished the series, I felt like I overcomplicated things by having all these scripted bits instead of simply playing through the mod and letting Francesca's personality, not her backstory, guide the proceedings. Thus, when it came time for me to start making Frackin' Shellguard, I changed my focus. I did not want it to feature any scripted bits, nor did I want it to be about Francesca and her story. Thus, I retired her and every other character I made for Frackin' FFS. Enter Naji. Oh yes, here is where the fun begins. Naji was, at first, created specifically for Frackin' Shellguard. He and another Florin OC I made around that same time, Deadly, were the stars of the show, and the premise behind the show was Naji and Deadly were the first Florins to join Shellguard. That's it. Like I said, no complicated backstories, no scripted bits, just these characters' personalities guiding everything. Naji was meant to be wild and outgoing, while Deadly was... Actually, Deadly wound up being nothing more than an NPC at first. She didn't have much of a personality, but I hoped to develop her into Naji's balance, playing her more straight and tomboyish once I figured out the best way for me to do that. Oh, and both were smarter than the average Florin. For the first few episodes of Fracken Shellguard, that was the status quo. Then, around the time of episode 5's release, I got an itch. I got the urge to make Fracken Shellguard more like Fracken FFS. I started feeling the same concerns I had when I went into the production of Fracken FFS. Namely, that Fracken Shellguard was turning out to be just another playthrough of the Shellguard mod, and that I was copying other people's playthroughs, namely Captain Southbird's. Thus, after episode 5, the series leaned more and more on scripted bits. I threw more OCs into the mix. I created complicated backstories behind Najee and Dedali. Najee worked as a security guard before joining Shellguard, and Dedali was, again, not as developed. Both she and Najee had this close friend who tragically passed away several years before the start of the series, someone they were intimate with even. And yet, somehow, this person not only came back to life, not only had she turned evil, but she was in charge of the biggest evil faction in Fracken Shellguard, the Florin Liberation Army. Enter Nebeba, or Nebi for short, also known as the character who's in my profile pic. See this cute face? Yeah, that face belonged to someone who was originally meant to be evil. Or rather, she had an evil, cold, and calculating personality named Zalina shoved into her, except it wasn't the real Nebi. This Nebi was a clone of the real Nebi. One of many clones, in fact. Yeah, I wasn't kidding when I said I made complex backstories for these characters. And it didn't stop there. At the start of this vlog, I mentioned a character named Dawdra. Dawdra was, again, made specifically for Fracken Shellguard. She did not have much of a personality, but her big deal was that she was shunned by a group of Florins she once considered friends. These Florins were not the greatest people around. Najee and Dedali would rescue and befriend her after her old friends left her behind on some random planet, and she would go on to join Shellguard. By the end of the series, she would help Najee and Dedali snap Nebi out of her Zalina persona, and everyone would live happily ever after. But wait, there's more! I had yet another OC that I wanted to feature in Fracken Shellguard. It took me a while to find a way to introduce her into the series, but by the time I got to the Survivor boss fight, I found my opening. This character became someone who was already in Ironwatch by the time the series started, and I figured she'd want to go with Najee and Dedali on missions, if only out of necessity. I also knew I still had the Ironwatch missions ahead of me. I wanted Dedali to join Ironwatch ahead of those missions, and I thought she'd be a nice balance for Deddy. Enter Tamaya, an Apex for once. Why Apex? Because I freaking love the Apex. Enough said. Anyways, Tamaya ultimately became this super serious and loyal person, someone dedicated to the task at hand and Shellguard itself, and yet, she was missing something, or rather, someone in her life. Much like Najee and Deddy, Tamaya had an old friend she'd been long separated from. This person wasn't dead, just roped into a world of corporate chicanery en route to becoming a well-known pop star. By the time she realized she'd been duped into signing a terrible contract with a massive record label, it was too late. She could not break away easily, and she couldn't do much other than do what her superiors wanted her to do. Be a mega pop star, and make her record label all of the money. Not just some of the money, all of the money. Enter Alyana, aka Ollie, aka Lady Block, aka Tamaya's girlfriend. She wound up featuring in one episode of Fracken Shellguard focused more around Tamaya, albeit with a different design than what she has today. And here's where I need to back away for a few moments. Just like Fracken FFS, I had all these grand plans for Fracken Shellguard and all the characters I featured there. There was going to be a Fracken Shellguard sequel series, something I discussed in various vlogs and update posts last year. Obviously, it never happened, and here's why. 1, I could not decide who or what the Fracken Shellguard sequel series was to be about, nor did I ever come up with a name for it. Did I want to focus on Najee and all his friends? Or did I want to focus on Tamaya, her storyline with Ollie? It didn't matter. Just like Fracken FFS, I came away from Fracken Shellguard feeling like things got too complicated for me to handle, even more so than Fracken FFS. By the time I completed every mission the Shellguard mod had to offer, I still needed to get to Najee and Deadly rescuing Nevi. That necessitated me scripting entire episodes, and that was a pain. Kinda fun, but painful nonetheless. A series that started with me just playing through a fun and amazing Starbound mod became a series where everything was scripted and the proceedings had little to do with the mod in question. Seriously, substitute Shellguard with the name of any other generic private military mercenary organization, and very little will change. Shift some titles around, very little will change. In the end, I've moved on from Fracken Shellguard, and I feel like I'm in a better place now for doing so. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad it exists, and even if I'm not fond of how it turned out, I'm happy I made the series in the way I did, complete with all those scripted bits and weird render errors. If I had just done a playthrough of the Shellguard mod, characters like Tamaya might never have existed, and I might not have gotten so interested in making art of them. That's the thing. Towards the end of Fracken Shellguard's production, I got into the habit of making art of my OCs on a regular basis, at least outside of drawing them for thumbnails and such. I realized how much more fun that was to me compared to making Fracken Shellguard. I made reference sheets for Najee and all his friends. I posted fun little drawings of them over on my art Twitter account. When I decided against making a Fracken Shellguard sequel series, I wound up separating them from Fracken Shellguard, changing their backstories to where they no longer had anything to do with that. For instance, my new backstory for Nevi no longer has her dying or being an evil clone or whatever, and I've even retired or decanonized characters like Dawdra, who no longer have any relevance to any of my OCs or anything I do today. A part of me still wants to make all these wild and crazy stories about my characters, and that's why I'll never say never to making something like Fracken Shellguard in the future. Right now though, I just want to have fun making content like this and drawing my OCs. If I can do that, then I'll be fine. Speaking of, you can pay me to draw my characters, or yours if you want me to. I will have a link in this video's description to places where you can commission me. You can also throw money to my Patreon and Ko-fi, and you can do all the typical supporting people on YouTube things. Subscribe to the channel, ring that bell, which happens to be the same button as subscribe these days. So make sure that if you are subscribed, click the subscribe button again and select the all option when the menu pops up. That way you will be notified each time I upload a video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this, however long this ramble about my OCs turned out to be. Let me know in the comments if you have or had any Starbound OCs you like drawing or writing stories about. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye for now.